Welcome to another Monday Morning Pastor, where we look at a point or two from yesterday's sermon to help us get through the weekend. Yesterday was Mother's Day, which for Diane and me was a bit different. This was our first Mother's Day without our moms. Both of our moms passed away this last year. And oddly enough, the passage of scripture that came up in our regular series through 1 Thessalonians Chapter 2 had a lot of parenting imagery in it. From 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, we learned that many of the skills and values, practices, and convictions that are involved with good parenting are what are also needed for successful life in ministry and in church. Said another way, if you are a good parent, you have a greater chance of succeeding in serving God and helping people. If you read our Bible passage from yesterday, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, you will notice that although Paul is talking about his successful ministry and service to this church in Thessalonica, he repeatedly uses the imagery and example of being a mother or father to describe ministry and service in the church. We suggested that there are 7 principles that we can glean from this passage, and I wanted to address one of them this morning. And it is this: whether we are talking about parenting or church ministry, both roles or both callings will face heartache, challenges, disappointments, mistakes, failures, obstacles, opposition, and the temptation to throw in the towel. Actually, I've yet to meet a pastor or a parent who doesn't do their job while carrying personal grief or pain. But the good ones push through and don't give up, and they even find ways of using their pain to their advantage. The best parents and the best servants and ministers in the church simply don't give up, because both are divine callings, that is, assignments from God with His promise of help and support. I want to read a couple verses from our passage yesterday, and I think you'll notice that there is opposition, but there's also God's help. It's from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, the first 2 verses. Paul writes, "You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results." In other words, it was a successful ministry to this church. It clearly was. We had previously, now listen to this, we had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, that's a nearby church, as you know, but with the help of our God, we dared to tell you the gospel in the face of strong opposition. We mentioned yesterday that tough times are a natural result and part of both parenting and serving God. And it's good to know this, because when heartache comes, we are ready with God to push through it. Thinking about my mother while she was alive, and more so in fact after her passing last summer, I thought of the challenges that my mom faced, most of her life being a single parent with a full-time job. Born during the Depression, she grew up in poverty. Her first husband, Ray, a lieutenant in the Air Force, perished in a plane crash in 1953 near the Duluth Air Force Base in Minnesota, making her a young single mom with a toddler, my half-sister. After having 3 boys, her marriage to my dad didn't last, and so she ended up raising 4 children alone while working full-time as a school teacher. About that time in the early 60s, her own mother, Grandma Lois, perished in a car accident. And although I never thought we were lacking, in retrospect, it was incredibly hard work for our mother, putting us first, taking care of us, and trying to make ends meet. I do remember one time when I came home and the electricity was turned off to our home because of lack of payment. I also remember my mom scraping together the money to buy a brand new Ford Fairlane station wagon. And during the winter months, she had to park the vehicle at the top of the driveway. And one time she did that, and she got up to go to work the next morning, and some large vehicle had crashed into the car and several other cars and nearly totaled her new vehicle. I remember the tears and the heartbreak that it caused my mom to see her new car demolished like that. Oddly enough, I remember that station wagon well. I learned to drive in that car, and I still remember the license plate. Memorized it, KUA 992. And although she and my dad had been divorced a long time, neither remarried, I recall the grief and sadness that we all experienced, and my mom too, when my dad, who was an alcoholic, took his own life in 1989. It was shortly after my father's death that an old boyfriend reappeared. Someone that I didn't know, but she had been engaged to when she was much younger, but never married. He showed up and they were engaged to be married. And we were all excited for Mom, thinking that she found her final love of her life, but she decided not to marry Dewey. Dewey lived in Minnesota, and he was caring for his elderly mother. Mom wanted to stay near her children and grandchildren, so once again, putting her family first, putting her kids first, she stayed out here. And once Dewey's mother passed away, it was too late for marriage. Dewey, at this point in his life, had Parkinson's, and I was actually with Mom. It was at Christmas time when she received the phone call that Dewey had passed away, and she sobbed and sobbed. I think probably wondering if she had perhaps made a mistake, carrying the grief of another loss with her because she put her family first. It was about 5 years ago that Mom had a stroke, greatly limiting what she could do. And not too long after that, my youngest brother, Christopher, was diagnosed with cancer, and he didn't last 2 weeks. And neither Mom nor any of Chris's siblings got to say goodbye. Our youngest brother, Mom's youngest child, dying of cancer. And I still remember speaking to Mom about Christopher, and there was nothing that could bring greater sorrow and grief to her face and her eyes than to talk about the loss of her youngest son to cancer. This was during COVID, and because of the restrictions of COVID, none of us got to say goodbye to Chris other than his beautiful wife, Christine. Mom didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to say goodbye. And what a terrible loss for all of us, especially for our mother. Just another great source of pain and grief and loss to her. Something that's not altogether uncommon among lots of parents. Mom was tough, and occasionally she could be cold at times, but she loved us. She knew her calling and her responsibility as a mother. And I today got a note from my brother Greg. We were reflecting on Mother's Day, and Greg said something that I completely agree with. We had a wonderful mother because she chose to be. So life is hard, parenting is hard, ministry is hard. Don't go it alone. And since it is a calling, God will provide His resources and strength to get through the pain. Through the pain. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.